Hi everyone, I did rural and urban communities for this assignment. So to start, the general trends of obesity and chronic disease from the CDC basically said what we've all kind of been studying in this coursework and in other nutrition coursework, that it's getting worse. So the CDC referred to obesity as a common, serious, and costly disease with a prevalence of 42% of the adult population in the U.S. having obesity in 2017 to 2018. Over the last 2 decades, for example, there has been an 11.9% increase in adult obesity and a 4.5% increase in severe adult obesity cases in the United States. The CDC lists that obesity is related to conditions like heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, and certain types of cancers. And additionally, obesity is more costly to treat than someone who is not considered obese, who does not have obesity, who is not considered to have obesity. I'm still working on that. There's a relationship between the rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes and also the rates of obesity and stroke. Those are my 2 chronic illnesses that I chose. More specifically, the CDC found that about 1 in 10 American adults experience diabetes, have diabetes, with 90 to 95% of those cases being type 2 diabetes, meaning that that's a lot more prevalent than type 1 diabetes. So with this, they've also seen that obesity is a risk factor for having type 2 diabetes, and to clump it together, for stroke as well. A lot of this research tied right together. So a lot of complex metabolic processes go into having type 2 diabetes or having a stroke, and same with having obesity. So while they don't have a technically causal relationship, and I didn't find data through the CDC to say this is the one thing, obesity is the one thing that caused either type 2 diabetes or stroke, there was data that linked obesity to both of those conditions in the American adult population. So within the rural and urban populations that I focused on, the rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes were found to be just that, hand in hand. So similarly to just the American population overall, there's been a definite increase in the rate of obesity, and with that, there's been an increase in the rate of type 2 diabetes, specifically in rural communities. That's what I found that a lot of this was focused on, because that's where we're seeing a lot of increase of these, the rate of obesity and the chronic illness as well that can come with it. Also, the current rates of stroke were found to be extremely higher in those who lived in rural communities. This could be related to obesity, but could also be a couple other things, such as access to health care, health behaviors like eating healthy foods or engaging in physical exercise, or avoiding tobacco products. So while obesity was definitely linked to both type 2 diabetes and stroke in rural communities, there was other focus, so we can't just say that it was, again, just obesity causing these things. However, I did find that as the rate of obesity went up in these communities, the rate of type 2 diabetes and stroke increased as well. So I think they would call that a proportional increase, a direct increase, a direct relationship. Lastly, the prevalence of obesity and chronic disease over the past 20 years within the rural and urban populations that I studied was just that. There has been an increase in both chronic illnesses that I studied, the stroke and type 2 diabetes, along with obesity in both populations. However, again, it was more severe in the rural communities, so that was their main focus. There was a very good graphic that I discovered through a webpage that the CDC had published, and I will share it on this post. Essentially, it showed that there was an increase in all weight categories except for overweight men. And I found that to be very interesting and relating to not only the rural and urban communities, but just the American adult population. There were definitely differences in the trends of obesity and chronic illness within the rural-urban population. Like I said, there was a significant amount of higher rates of obesity, type 2 diabetes, and stroke in the rural communities. It was stated that those that live in rural settings are more likely to die of the 5 leading causes of death, being heart disease, cancer, unintentional injury, chronic lower respiratory disease, and stroke. They are less likely to engage in healthy behaviors such as eating nutritious food, avoiding drugs and tobacco use, and less likely to have adequate access to health care as opposed to their urban counterparts. They also tend to be lower income, older, and less educated than those living in rural settings. Than those living in urban settings. And all of these things are really consistent with the data that I found that backs up the higher rates of obesity, chronic disease, and those things leading to death. So lastly, all in all, rural residents have worse health outcomes, including but not limited to weight, possibly due to a number of factors. Obesity is more prevalent in rural areas, with 34.2% of adults having obesity, than in urban areas, with 28.7% of adults having obesity. Thanks, guys. Bye.